Hello and welcome to the Business Interview. I'm Marcus Carlson. Today we're talking about the Eurozone debt crisis and also taking a closer look at the health of Ireland's economy. For that, we're turning now to John Bruton. He's a former Irish Prime Minister and he's now the chairman of Ireland's International Financial Services Centre. Welcome to France 24.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to pick your brain. There's a lot of criticism in connection with the Eurozone debt crisis towards, or when it comes to Eurozone leaders. A lot of market participants, for instance, are not very happy with how the politicians have dealt with this crisis. You, as a former leader yourself, a former Prime Minister, what do you make of their behaviour?
Well, I think we've got some design gaps in the system for running the European Union, in particular for running the European Union's currency, the euro, and making quick decisions. The European Union is designed to work quite slowly to achieve consensus, but unfortunately the markets are not satisfied to work at that pace. And we've got to speed things up. And we've got to speed things up in some cases in regard to things like rescue packages for individual countries, or if we were to have a euro bond or enlarge the funds, we have to do all of that by unanimous agreement among all of the 17 members of the Eurozone.
And that's a system we can't have.
We don't have provision for majority voting. If we had a provision for majority voting, we could take decisions, as we do in other areas of EU action, relatively quickly. So it's getting the consensus among 17 different countries. That's what's making things difficult. The politicians, one can be impatient with them, but they have to work with the system they have. The system they have isn't perfect, but they're doing their best, I think, in difficult circumstances.
But some people are saying, though, that even the politicians, they've been too slow to cop on to the fact that there's a problem, that they haven't really seen that the problem is serious. You have connections with the current Irish government. Do they realise in what kind of a situation the Eurozone is in?
I think they do get it, but we started off thinking we just had a problem with Greece, then we discovered we had a problem with 2 other countries, and now we have a problem perhaps with banks and with some bigger countries. So the solutions that will apply in that situation are different to the ones that might have applied in the case of Greece. So we're having to learn as we go along. It's not easy.
Now, you talked about Greece there. Much of the focus at this stage is on that country, but of course, Portugal and Ireland, they've also have had to accept bailouts from the International Monetary Fund and from the European Union. If you look at the Irish economy, how is that doing at this stage, in your view?
Well, I think it's true in the case of both Portugal and Ireland that having received assistance, they are both complying very fully with the terms on which they got the assistance. And in Ireland's case, that has led in the last quarter to an actual uptick in growth, significant growth in the economy, which is a very good sign. I hope it continues. We can't guarantee it will continue, but we will stick with the programme. And this seems also to be the case with Portugal. There is a difficulty with Greece. That is true. But I think what we've seen in 2 out of the 3 cases where assistance has been offered, that governments have been willing, once they have a democratic mandate, to fulfil the programme to the full.
But what is Ireland doing that Greece is not doing at this stage?
Ireland, for example, it persuaded its public service workers to accept and vote for a 14% reduction in their salaries. We have agreed that any civil servant retiring will not be replaced. So the existing people are going to have to do the work of more people, that more people had done in the past. We've also agreed to increases in taxation, narrowing of tax bands, and the reduction of certain services. And this is going forward in accordance with a plan which is accompanied by much better financial planning. We're now going to be able to look more clearly and more honestly at what we're doing today will mean 5 years out. So we're going to have better budgeting processes as well.
What's your take on what's happening in Greece at the moment? There's been fresh austerity measures taken by the Greek government. When is the camel's back going to be broken?
Well, I think we've got to look at the fact that Greece is a relatively wealthy country. It has substantial oil and gas potential. It has substantial property owned by the government. It's got to look at all its assets in an honest way, register them properly. We don't have a proper land registry in Greece, and without that you can't start selling some of those assets. But Greece has the capacity to pay its debts over time. What we're trying to do now is buy time. Time seems to be the most expensive commodity in the world at the moment.
How close do you think we are to a default? How big is that risk?
Well, I mean, we have had already some corporate bonds not being repaid, some pension commitments have not been met in Greece, so that is already a difficult situation. But I admire the political will that is being displayed in Greece. I hope the two parties in Greece can put party politics aside and implement the programme for the sake of their own country and for the sake of the rest of Europe. I think it all comes back to politics. Business people thought for many years that they could do without politics, that the market would look after everything. We now realise very much that good politics in Europe and in the individual countries and the United States is absolutely vital for the success of business. Mm-hmm. That rediscovery is something that, in ways, it's a pity we have had to have, but I hope that we draw the right conclusions.
Now, as I said before, you're the chairman of the International Financial Services Centre in Ireland, and as such, you're working to promote really the finance sector and to promote Irish business as well. If we take a closer look at the financial sector per se, when you look at the banks, how worried are you over the future of European banks? Are they going to need recapitalisation? That is a huge debate.
The answer to that is yes. In Ireland's case, we have recapitalised our banks, and that may well have been one of the contributors to the relatively good performance we've seen in the last quarter, that people now know that the banks have adequate capital. I think the same is going to have to be done throughout the European Union. We're going through an era of deleveraging. That's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick. Mm-hmm. But we've got to have a plan. And once people can see that we have a plan, that it's a 5-year plan or whatever it is, and they can see light at the end of the tunnel, they are prepared to enter the tunnel. But unless we have a plan that shows where we're going to finish our journey, some people are reluctant to even start on the journey.
But then we come back to the political point, don't we? How are leaders going to be able to persuade their populations that giving more billions of euros to banks is a good idea?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is run the European Union on a full-time basis. The key decisions are now being taken by the heads of government who, as far as the European Union work is concerned, are doing that at the weekend once or twice a month. Mm. They're not meeting full-time on the issue. I think we need to see a rearrangement of priorities. The first priority for all the heads of government of all the EU countries at the present time should be European business. Because if we don't deal properly with European business, our national business won't get done either. So the priority should be solving this problem, not domestic elections, not domestic political questions, but getting it right quickly. As far as the European Union is concerned, making a decision about whatever leverage the European fund is to have, whether we're to have a euro bond, and if so, on what conditions, what improvements do we need on the advance approval of government budgets in individual member states, not just fines after the event, but approval in advance. These are things we're going to need to do, and we need to do them quickly. We need to put it in place with a lot of money behind it so that the markets will be intimidated, that the markets will not be prepared to take on governments who have that sort of backing.
It seems, though, we're seeing very little political will for actually closer integration or to go ahead with closer integration within the European Union. How long do you think it will take to put in place the kind of model that you're arguing for?
The price we would pay if we fail is far greater than any price we would pay by pooling our sovereignty. And I think that has to be put starkly before people. The risks of default and what that would entail, and the contagion that it would entail, and the sudden loss of living standards that would entail. Look at what happened in Russia after the collapse of communism. People were starving. That's what default can mean, starvation. Now, we're far from that in Europe, and we will remain far from that in Europe, so long as we show the necessary determination to make the decisions and make them quickly. We have, I would say, 3 to 4 months, no more, to make all the relevant decisions and put them all together in a plan. We do not have leisure in this matter, and there is no country in Europe, no country in the Eurozone that can insulate itself from the consequences of failure. And I would say also nor can Britain, which is in a sense the Eurozone's financial centre, even though it isn't in the Eurozone. It would suffer very greatly if we went back to exchange controls and to 27 different national economies. The impoverishment of Europe, that would progressively entail is entirely avoidable if we make the necessary decisions and make them quickly.
All right, a very stern message there. I just want to ask you briefly here towards the end about the European Commission's plan to levy a financial transactions tax across the European Union. How feasible do you think that project is?
It's not feasible at all. The idea that we could do that in Europe independently of the rest of the world and penalise our own financial sector at a time when it's going through very difficult circumstances and has to recapitalise itself makes no sense at all.
So you're not thinking that that could indeed happen in the next few years?
It can't happen. It's a populist proposal.
Why not? Just very briefly.
Because Europe ought not penalise itself when the rest of the world is not imposing this tax on itself. Now, if every country in the world, or all major financial centres, were to agree, if the United States was to agree, China was to agree, all those other countries were to agree, that they're going to have a small financial transactions tax, well then perhaps that would be a good idea. It might slow down the pace at which people make decisions. It might put some restraint on some of these automated transactions that have led to so much volatility in the financial markets. There is a case for that. But there is no case, in my view, for Europe unilaterally penalising itself. We're already penalising ourselves unilaterally on climate change, which is the right thing to do, I believe, but that's enough for Europe to do. I don't think we ought to go and start doing the same on another front as well at a time when we're having to compete with so many new competitors and emerging economies in the global market. We don't need to be penalising ourselves here in Europe. We need to strengthen ourselves in Europe instead.
Fascinating conversation. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. John Bruton, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us.
Thank you.
And with that, we're going to wrap up the programme. Thanks for watching.